For half a century, a promise held steady across the industrial economies of the developed world. Work harder, work smarter, let the machine improve your output, and the wage will follow naturally behind. Productivity rose steadily through the decades, and income rose with it in rough but reliable parallel. The tools got better year after year, and the worker got paid more in direct response. Then the coupling broke without announcement or explanation, or any immediate recognition from those affected. Productivity continued rising at its historical pace, but wages stopped following the pattern they had established. The tools still improved with each passing year, and the output still increased across every sector. But the money went elsewhere, traveling through different channels to reach entirely different destinations than before. This video explains how productivity decoupled from compensation, not because technology failed, but because the system changed. Between 1948 and 1973, productivity and wages moved together in rough parallel across the American economy. When output per hour rose by 10%, median compensation rose by roughly the same amount. The worker built more in less time, and the worker earned more in direct return. The relationship was not perfect in its alignment, but it was structural and sustained over decades. Capital needed labor to scale production beyond the limits of existing capacity and available technology. Labor needed capital to amplify effort beyond what human strength alone could ever possibly achieve. Unions had density across industries, giving workers collective leverage at the bargaining table with management. Profit margins had limits set by competition, preventing unlimited extraction from labor costs without consequence. When a factory doubled its output, it needed more workers to operate equipment and fill shifts. Growth translated directly into jobs, which created employment opportunities across regions and across skill levels. Jobs translated into purchasing power that allowed workers to participate in consumer markets as buyers. The system reinforced itself through these linkages, creating a feedback loop of shared prosperity and stability. Somewhere in the mid-1970s, the relationship began to drift away from its historical alignment without drama. Productivity kept rising at its established pace, while compensation slowed its growth across nearly every industry. The gap was small initially, just a few percentage points that seemed explainable as temporary fluctuation. By 1995, the gap had widened into something undeniable, visible in any longitudinal analysis of the data. Between 1979 and 2020, productivity increased by 62% across the economy measured by output per hour. Median hourly compensation rose by only 17% over that same four-decade period of apparent growth. The output per worker nearly doubled in that span, but the paycheck did not follow anywhere close. The break was not accidental or the result of unforeseen external shocks that nobody could have predicted. Three shifts converged during this period to separate productivity from compensation in a structural way. First, automation became substitution rather than amplification of existing human labor capacity in production processes. Early automation made workers more productive by giving them tools that enhanced their output per hour. Later automation replaced the need for the person entirely, eliminating the role completely from the process. The assembly line needed fewer hands to produce the same volume of output at the same quality. The warehouse needed fewer drivers, as autonomous systems handled logistics and movement of goods internally. Output rose as technology improved, but headcount fell across nearly every sector of the industrialized economy. The worker who remained became more productive by definition, because output was divided among fewer people. The productivity gain did not distribute across a larger workforce as it had in previous decades. It consolidated in the hands of those who owned the automated systems and controlled their deployment. Second, ownership of productive assets became increasingly concentrated among a smaller group of institutional investors. In the era of shared productivity growth, capital was competitive and fragmented across many independent actors. By the 1990s, capital had become mobile and could relocate across borders with minimal friction. Labor was not mobile in the same way and could not easily follow capital to locations. Shareholder primacy became dominant doctrine in corporate governance structures across advanced economies in the developed world. Profit maximization became fiduciary duty, legally enforceable through shareholder derivative suits and activist investor campaigns. Wages became a cost to minimize rather than a partner to negotiate with in good faith. Stock buybacks replaced wage increases as the preferred method of returning value to equity holders. The output still grew year over year, but the distribution narrowed to fewer and fewer beneficiaries. Third, the bargaining power of labor collapsed under policy changes and institutional erosion across multiple decades. Union membership peaked in 1954 at 35% of the American workforce across most major industries. By 2020, it had fallen to just 10%, concentrated in specific public sector roles. The decline was not organic or the result of workers voluntarily abandoning collective representation through unions. Right-to-work laws expanded across states, making it harder to maintain union funding and consistent membership levels. Enforcement of labor protections weakened as regulatory agencies faced budget cuts and direct political pressure from business. Without collective negotiation, wage setting became an individual transaction between employee and employer with unequal power. Individual negotiation inherently favors the side with more options and less immediate need for reaching agreement. Capital had options, including the ability to wait indefinitely, relocate operations, or substitute technology for labor. Labor had bills, which created time pressure and reduced negotiating leverage in any individual transaction. The system did not stop functioning or collapse under the weight of these structural changes. It adapted to maintain output while redirecting the gains to different recipients within the hierarchy. When wages stopped rising, household debt filled the gap in purchasing power that stagnant income created. Credit cards expanded rapidly in the 1980s, making consumer credit widely accessible for the first time. Household debt as a percentage of income doubled between 1980 and 2008 across all income brackets. The consumption continued at levels that exceeded what stagnant wages alone could possibly support without leverage. Debt maintained demand in consumer markets without requiring employers to raise wages accordingly in response. The illusion of stability lasted for decades, sustained by expanding access to credit and financial leverage. It was not stability in any structural sense, but rather deferred consequences hidden beneath borrowed consumption. Technology accelerated the divergence between productivity and compensation without directly causing it, through any inherent mechanism. Software raised output per worker by automating routine tasks and streamlining complex processes across organizations. Cloud computing lowered overhead costs by reducing the need for physical infrastructure and dedicated maintenance staff. Every efficiency gain increased productivity metrics that economists track to measure economic health and performance. But efficiency gains do not automatically translate to wage increases through any natural or inevitable mechanism. If the efficiency is owned by capital, the gain accrues to capital automatically and entirely legally. If the worker does not own the tool that generates efficiency, the worker cannot capture the gain. Productivity became something that happened to labor rather than something that happened through labor's own agency. The metrics confirmed productivity growth, showing steady improvement in output per hour worked across decades. They did not capture distribution of that productivity across different classes of economic participants in society. Corporate profits grew even faster than GDP, concentrating in specific sectors and specific types of firms. Median income stagnated, failing to keep pace with either productivity growth or cost of living increases. The headline numbers looked healthy to policymakers who focused on aggregate measures of total economic output. The economy was productive by any standard measure of output per unit of input labor provided. The worker was not the primary beneficiary of that productivity, which represented a clear historical departure. The pattern repeated itself in the platform economy that emerged in the 2010s with digital labor. Drivers increased output per hour through app-based routing that optimized trip efficiency and reduced all downtime. The app captured the efficiency by controlling pricing algorithms and taking a percentage of each transaction. Warehouses increased throughput through algorithmic scheduling that maximized the pace of fulfillment without adding any workers. Freelancers increased their availability through global connectivity that allowed work across time zones and international borders. The platform set the rate of compensation, creating take-it-or-leave-it terms with absolutely no negotiation possible. The productivity existed in measurable form, visible in throughput metrics and efficiency dashboards monitored in real time. The bargaining power did not exist in any form that workers could use to capture their productivity gains. Output rose across platform sectors as technology improved, but compensation remained flat per unit of work. The structure differs from the industrial economy, but the incentives align with earlier patterns perfectly. Control replaced negotiation as the primary mechanism for managing labor relations and ensuring consistent output levels. When workers cannot collectively bargain, management monitors them individually to maintain productivity without raising compensation costs. Keystroke tracking measures activity levels, creating surveillance of work that extends far beyond observable final output. Delivery time metrics set performance standards that workers must meet to maintain their current employment status. Surveillance ensured compliance with productivity standards without requiring employers to raise compensation in return for effort. Productivity remained high as monitoring technology prevented workers from reducing effort in response to wages. The system maintained output levels without granting workers power over the terms of their own employment. Efficiency became extraction, converting human effort into profit without sharing gains with those generating the output. The consequences were delayed by decades, but they accumulated beneath the surface of apparent economic stability. Demand weakened gradually as wage growth slowed, reducing the purchasing power that sustained consumer markets historically. Investment in human capital declined as returns flowed to shareholders rather than workforce development programs entirely. Political stability frayed as productivity promises failed to materialize for successive generations of working people. The system remained productive in aggregate terms, continuing to generate increasing output per worker year over year. The distribution became unsustainable politically and economically, creating tensions that aggregate metrics completely concealed from view. This is not about machines replacing humans in an inevitable march of technological progress through history. This is about who owns the productivity gain when machines replace human labor in production processes. For decades, the gain was shared because the system required broad distribution to maintain demand. Then the system changed through policy decisions and shifts in institutional power that deliberately favored capital. Capital chose efficiency and concentrated gains rather than distributing them across broader populations of workers. Labor absorbed the cost of this choice through stagnant wages and declining economic security over time. Productivity still rises with each technological improvement that emerges from research and development investment every year. Output still grows in aggregate, visible in all the metrics that economists use to track health. The coupling between productivity and compensation still does not exist in any systematic or reliable way. History doesn't collapse suddenly with dramatic crisis that announces the end of an established era. Systems do.